Well, as we've been hearing, the former England captain Ted Dexter died yesterday. He was 86, and after a recent illness, he passed away peacefully in the Compton Hospice in Wolverhampton at midday yesterday, surrounded by his family. Nicknamed Lord Ted, Dexter played 62 tests for England, leading the side in 30 of them. He was inducted into the ICC Hall of Fame in June and was famous for his aggressive style of batting.
In again comes Hall from the nursery end. In goes to Dexter, who gets over it and hooks it imperiously downwards past McMorris up at silly mid-on for 2. McMorris turns to the alarm of an otherwise peaceful pigeon and throws back. The pigeon takes off and goes straight into the pavilion. 39 for 2, 5 to Barrington, 25 to Dexter. Hall comes in, bowls to Dexter, gets over it and hooks in magnificently. Away there, down to mid-wicket. It's chased but fruitlessly by McMorris. It's another 4. This takes Dexter up to 33 out of 47. Of course, he's made bigger scores than 33 in test matches, and he may well do so this time. But I think I've never seen Dexter bat more reassuringly nor more commandingly. And the situation he had to cope with immediately after lunch would have been a desperate one for any batsman in the world. He's risen to it quite gloriously.
Cricketers. Let's hope Mark Nicholas is there. Broadcaster, former player, is a spokesman for the Dexter family. And Mark, I hope you can join us. How are you?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello. Have you got me? Hello?
Well, we don't seem to be hearing very much at the moment.
Aggers?
Victor.
I'm here.
Salvage the situation. We talked initially about... about Dexter.
I mean, we're mourning him in all sorts of different ways. Oddly enough, I got sent something. We were talking right at the start of play about Dexter, the great theorist, and glory be, my attention was drawn to a letter he sent just a few weeks ago to the Cricketer magazine, and they showed a photo of Ollie Pope batting, and he was driving, and his right knee was almost on the ground, and Ted had written this letter within the last week or two, couple of weeks, or a couple of months perhaps, explaining that he's in a very poor position here. His weight distribution is all wrong.
Yes.
I mean, how bizarre. There he is at the age of 85, 86, and he's obviously been watching a bit of cricket, but reading his magazine and seeing this photo and dissecting it and working out that, hang on, he's in the completely wrong position to play the shot properly. You'd thought he'd had other things to do, but no.
You would, and that's what I saw Ted Dexter for being extremely convivial company.
Yes.
And he was always there for Brian Johnston's summer parties and so on. And you'd sit there and you'd chat away. Mark Nicholas is with us. Mark.
Hi, have you got me now, Aggers?
I've got you. Thank you so much for that. I was looking at... as you know, these things can go horribly wrong sometimes.
We know.
Out and about, exactly. Now, first of all, obviously we want to send our condolences to Ted's family and of course his friends. You've been acting as a spokesman, I think, for them today, because clearly you were very close to Ted.
Well, yes. He was my boyhood hero, and then latterly... initially, when in a mad moment he appointed me as captain of England and England A tour to Zimbabwe, but then through Sunningdale Golf Club, really, we became even closer. It was a very interesting period, the 60s, with the changing state of Britain as you and I were growing up. And Ted had the kind of flair and a little sense of rebellion, not quite revolution in him, that the non-conformist side of him that was rather fascinating. He played cricket with a dash and a dare that wasn't really a part of the black and white age of the game that we watched on TV. And so I found him fascinating and have ever since. And yes, a very close friend. His 80th birthday was actually held in this house. But Susan is in remarkable shape. They've had a pretty tough month as he deteriorated very quickly. And her courage is remarkable, as gorgeous as ever, a very, very beautiful woman. and she's coped well, as have Genevieve and Tom and the grandkids, and they're just very proud of him, really, and very eager that people continue to understand his remarkable contribution to the game.
Yes. As a cricketer, I wonder, Mark, how well suited he would have been to today. I mean, it just seems to me that he'd been right up there. He'd been IPL top bidder. I mean, he'd have been a brilliant modern cricketer, wouldn't he?
Yes, and he said that in one of our last Zooms. We've been having Zoom calls every fortnight since the new year, and had tremendous surprise guests for him on them. Michael Vaughan actually was one of them, and Athers has been one, various other people, and he adored Michael Vaughan, thought a lot of him, and of Athers, and we've all talked about that. Ted reckoned that, of course, his style of play, batting wise and fielding, was suited to the game, but he reckoned he'd have contributed with the ball as well. He was lively medium from a tall height, hit the seam, swung it a bit, took wickets in test matches and in one-day cricket. And people mustn't forget, he was really the great moderniser. He firstly thought of the 50 and 60 over game long before it came into being in 1962 and 63. He was the guy who set the fields and thought his way through the short form of the game when no one else was taking it seriously.
He put the ball on the boundary, didn't he?
Well, no. What he did actually...
Is that not entirely true?
What he did best of all, straight up, was set straight fields and bowl full. So when the slog was on, which by the way was 5 and over in those days, he set field straight and he got the guys to bowl very full. Then he was behind with Harvey Bagnall. He was behind the Rothmans International's Cavaliers, and he reckons he could sneak in at number 6 with sides like Sobers and Canai and Pollock in the middle order. And they took that round England before the Sunday League developed, also under the Rothmans name all those years ago. But that was all Ted, as was, you probably know, I don't have to tell you or anybody in the business, but the Deloitte's World Rankings that have now become the ICC World Rankings came out of Ted's own private PR company. That was the launch, really, of the technical revolution, the digital revolution in cricket. Those rankings still stand to this day. He did say to me once, I do have rather a high opinion of myself. He said, and there was a week when I would have been number 1 in the world, he said, had the rankings existed in the early 60s. And of course, the spirit of cricket with Colin Cowdrey, 4-day cricket, central contracts for England players. There's an awful lot that Ted was behind.
Yes, and yet, funnily enough, when he was chairman of selectors, did you think everyone took him seriously in that role? I mean, he came out with some rather unusual comments at times, didn't he? I mean, we'll hear from Graham Gooch later, and I think he said that being captained by Graham Gooch is like being hit in the face with a wet fish. And there are other things, he talked about the planets being out of alignment and that sort of a thing. I mean, were there sort of diversionary tactics, do you think, when the cricket wasn't going very well? He'd come out with these sort of rather bizarre, random statements just to distract people.
Well, Ted was quirky, let's be honest.
Yes.
He was unique in many different ways. I think the Gooch thing was just a terrible mistake. He ended up very fond of Graham and full of admiration of Graham once he appointed him captain and saw the job that he did. I think at the time, the introverted side of Graham wasn't playing especially well against Terry Oldham in 1989. And the idea that introverted figure could then become captain of England didn't appeal to Ted at the moment. But within a year, he changed his mind on that. Mickey Stewart certainly played a part in convincing Ted that Graham was worth more than the thought. And then, of course, in that 3 or 4 year period, Graham did a great job and played so well. And Ted was fascinated by England in the Caribbean, which was a great performance in 1990.
Yes.
Winning that test in Jamaica, you probably called it, I would think. Actually, no, probably just before you, but he was absolutely gripped. He was in Zimbabwe with the 18, and we were about 6 of us round a little crackly radio trying to get the coverage from Jamaica. And when we won, he threw his arms in the air, and he really did leap about like a child. And he was very proud of the players he'd chosen for that tour who played so well in it. So yes, there were some difficult times when he was chairman of selectors. But there were also some very good times. And of course, he's the one who appointed Michael Atherton, albeit he resigned almost immediately afterwards. Athers always said He must have thought
that was,
got that bad.
that was most odd, wasn't it? I've just checked with Mike Atherton, because I went down just now, because I remember reading out the press release at Edgbaston, which said that Ted Dexter has just resigned as chairman of selectors, and such was the mood at the time that actually the crowd started applauding, which was a bit awful, and Mike was standing out there. It was his first test match as captain, and I can still see him looking most bemused at what the crowd was possibly applauding at the time, because he didn't know either that his chairman had just resigned. But it was I don't think anything to do with his appointment of Mike as such. He had an incredible energy, didn't he, Mark? I mean, just reading the many tributes and the things that he's done. I mentioned standing as an MP in a very Labour-held seat as well. He went there as the Conservative, and one of the planks of his platform was that everyone there should send their boys to Eton. I'm not quite sure that would have gone down very well in that constituency.
He took on Jim Callaghan for the Labour seat. Or Jim Callaghan held the Labour seat, I should say. And he told the England selectors that he wasn't available for the tour to South Africa. Remember, he was captain at the time. MJK Smith got the job as captain. He lost by wild margin. Jim Callaghan, of all people to take on in that area, then rang.
I think he expanded his majority, I think, by some considerable amount.
That's dead right. And then he said, actually, I am available now because I haven't got any work to do here. So he jumped on the plane, turned up in South Africa three weeks late, walked straight into the test side, and England played very well and won the series. And of course, MJK was then in the job. But what people forget is how early he retired. He finished in 65 after a rather freakish accident with a car rather than a car crash. And then came back briefly in 88. In 68. Made 200 against Kent. But Horsham, the Kent side, including Derek Underwood, was picked in the Test side for the last couple of Ashes Test matches of that summer, and then came back again to play Sunday League games for Sussex in 1771, where he also played very well. You're right that he had a lot of adventures. He loved his motorbikes, he loved his fast cars, he loved his horses, he loved his greyhounds, he loved his family, he loved his travel. He flew a light aircraft, an Aztec. He actually flew it to Australia with Susan and Kid back.
Well, that's an extraordinary story, that.
24 times en route, you know. The deal with Ted's father was that, Susan's father, the deal was that as long as you stop at every airbase across the world, every British airbase, we'll let you land. You can fuel with refreshment, sleep the night. So wherever they landed in the world, there was this lineup of the British military saluting the Dexter family.
Story.
Got off the plane, yeah. And it took 3 weeks. They stopped 24 times, and he arrived in Sydney fresh as a daisy and worked as a journalist on that tour. But what a trip on that little plane with two young kids and a wife. Yeah, and that was the sort of thing he regarded pretty much as a norm. He didn't see much risk in life. He saw it all as an adventure. He was excited by the 100 because he saw it as an adventure. He couldn't see why people got so uptight about it. As he said, cricket's been a million things going, way back to its first incarnation in the 1800s to the birth of the short form game in the early 60s. And this might be another cracking idea. Who's to prejudge it? He said, he was very open-minded and the best forward thinker, I reckon, along with Martin Crowe, the best forward thinker about the game of cricket. Vic was talking there about a theorist, and the theory of batting and Ollie Pope on that front knee. What he didn't like about that was the leaning back and the front on. Now, what he's loved about the improvement in Joe Root is how he's playing alongside the ball. And just before lunch, Joe ran a couple down to third man off with a slightly open blade, but he let the ball come all the way alongside him. He wasn't front on and pushing out at the ball. And that's what Ted had been urging. Ted would send Joe emails, giving instructions how to play. I mean, he wasn't very shy. And Joe would say, you can't believe the thing Ted Dexter just told me. But of course, he quite enjoyed it because there was a relationship there with someone he wouldn't have otherwise heard from. And it sparked an interest in Joe. And even when he was a bit put out by one, he sort of forgave him within 24 hours and realised that it was only from a duty of care, not a duty of criticism.
Yeah. Lovely, Mark. Thank you for telling us all about Ted Dexter, and I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Great stuff. Thanks, Hagen.
Cheers, Mark. Bye-bye. Well, how about Dexter as a player then? Now we're joined by Robin Marler, who played alongside Dexter at Sussex for many years, and John Barclay, who, like Dexter, was Sussex captain and MCC president and started at Sussex when Ted was coming towards the end of his career. Good afternoon to both of you. Let's start with Robin. That Sussex side that you were part of, Robin, and obviously Ted. I mean, there were some characters in that team, weren't there?
Well, we go back further than that, my dear Agus. For some extraordinary reason, my first year as captain, I went to Cambridge and stood myself at cover point. Oh, lumbering clot that I am. Great mistake. A chap called Dexter came in, and off the back foot, he hit the most astonishing shot past my left hand, like a rocket. We got him out for 7, which was very fortunate, but I'd seen the shot that I said, that man's going to play for Sussex. And thereafter, he led me the most uncommon chase of all time. It went over to Denmark. It involved all sorts of lovely girls. This is pre-Susan. But eventually we got him. And his second ball in first-class cricket, he was hit sharply on the left elbow as he pushed forward in the correct manner by none other than Les Jackson, and retired hurt.
Oh, really? Well, I think this could be a colourful...
The second thing,
okay, go on, Robin.
The second thing you should know about him is that he was quite, without any shadow of a doubt, the best coach that ever walked the earth. I've seen him straighten out so many people in a matter of minutes. John Snow was one. Tony Lewis another. He did that in 20 minutes before a test match, which Tony Lewis was playing. And Tony Lewis made runs in the... He was a magnificent coach. And the reason he was so absolutely splendid is that he believed in the swinging of the club, as in golf, as in cricket. And this is a fundamental thing. If you swing the thing right, you've got a chance. The third thing I want to say is, and this won't be known to anybody, he made 300 in a day at Hastings, and amongst the audience was a frog. Well, I'm half a frog. For 25 years, I was half a frog. And that means a Frenchman. So sorry, all our allies. Anyway, this young fellow was a student of the Polytechnique, i.e. absolutely out of the top drawer in Paris, and he became, this man, the treasurer of Paris, no less. Quite a big place. And he also had the honour to be the chairman, or if not the president, of the Association of Baseball, Softball and Cricket in France. And he put cricket on the map in France, this chap, all on account of watching Dexter make this astonishing innings in Hastings. Now, not many people know that.
That's very true, Robin. We didn't know that. John Barclay. I'm not sure how you're going to compete with that. But give us your memories of Ted Dexter.
Well, Jonathan, first of all, lovely to hear the memories of Mark and Robin, and I can't really compete with it. But the thing is, Ted was my complete and utter schoolboy hero. Age 8/9, 63, 64 era, and he was heroic. Even if he didn't score runs, Jonathan, he walked to the pitch for the wicket so majestically that was almost good enough. But the very first time I saw him play was in the Gillette final in 1963, which I was generously taken to by my godfather. We sat at the nursery end on the grass, and he came into bat, and tears came to my eyes because he only made 3, caught a slip off Norman Gifford for 3. It was an awful moment, but I was much cheered up when we won the game by 14 runs or thereabouts in the evening. That was the first time. But compared with Robin, Jonathan and Mark, I didn't know Ted nearly as well. But what I did realise, both when he was president and chairman of the cricket committee at MCC at Lords, is that he had the most remarkable brain, which was sort of, as people often say, ahead of his time. He was the sort of Martin Peters, as Alf Ramsey used to say of Martin Peters, ahead of his time. And I think Ted was ahead of his time. He had remarkable insight, a great brain, and terrific technical knowledge on the game.
And from a player's perspective, John, I mean, they talk about his courage and bravery, that many of the runs he scored was against the West Indies, who had a very strong pace attack at the time.
Well, I mean, as I said, he was heroic, and that innings which John Arlott was describing at the beginning of your broadcast at Lords, which is memorable for thousands and one of the most memorable innings ever played because of its ferocity, I think, and unexpectedness. It was so unexpected in Test cricket. Yes, he drove the ball and hooked the ball, so far as I can remember from black and white coverage of the game, with enormous power. And therefore he was thrillingly exciting. And as Mark has said, you know, in a modern age of cricket, of course he would have adapted his game, and goodness knows what he would have invented. But I bet he would have invented something unexpected.
Yes. And do you think that he was a bit misrepresented or misunderstood, or perhaps a better way of putting it, when he was chairman of selectors? A lot of pressure on. The results weren't very good, and he sort of made all these sort of rather flamboyant explanations for what had happened.
Yeah. Jonathan, it's such an interesting one. I don't know. I think Ted's sense of humour, and he would say things a little bit sometimes, maybe tongue-in-cheek, perhaps to the press, and the press wouldn't quite get it, or they'd find a good story out of it. I don't know. So I think, the alignment with the stars thing,
yes,
and one or two other things, I think it was all done in jest, really. I don't think he was taking himself terribly seriously, and that sort of thing happens. But without a doubt, he had a wonderful brain for the game. He was very sympathetic and understanding towards people and their game, batsmen and bowlers. So yeah, I think I wouldn't exaggerate that part of it at all.
No. John, thanks so much for joining us today and giving your memories, and of course Robin Marler as well earlier on too. Thanks to both of you for sharing your memories of Ted Dexter, who in 1989 succeeded Peter May as chairman of selectors, famously travelling by motorbike around the grounds to look at the players. It didn't always go totally to plan. Here's Dexter as chairman of selectors talking about playing against India in that famous spin-wash tour of 1993.
They have some very talented players. Those two young batsmen are extremely gifted. We've got plenty of talent too. The trouble was that we were usually batting with mountains of runs against us. Our attack couldn't disturb their batting lineup, and as you know, in cricket, once you get behind, the runs on the board against you, it's very hard to come back. There were some encouraging signs. Lewis got his first 100 for England. Hick came through. I think they'll all be the better for that. I'm by no means gloomy.
Are we going to do better against Australia?
Yes, in our home conditions we will definitely do better. We're better suited to playing over here.
And you're going to continue as chairman of selectors?
Yes, well, I'm in there till March 94, unless the board gives me the boot in a couple of weeks' time. They're quite entitled to do that. We shall wait and see.
Well, he didn't quite make it to there, did he? But let's speak to Graham Gooch, who was captain under Ted Dexter. Hello, Graham. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, good afternoon, Jonathan. Yeah. How are you?
Well, I'm fine. I mean, what are your memories of Ted Dexter? Because there you were. I mean, at the sharp end as the captain, really, weren't you, when he was chairman of selectors?
Well, I do remember the motorbike because post the tour to India, he drove up my driveway about 60 yards long, and there's this motorbike, and he came to meet me because it was a bit of a post-mortem on the tour, and he stripped off his leathers. I didn't realise it was him first. And he had his blazer and MCC tie on underneath. And then he came in and we talked cricket, and I thought he was going to give me a bit of a rocket about the way we played. We couldn't handle the spin. We lost 3-0. We were ill. There was terrible press coverage, as you know, about the Tetley bitter and all that sort of stuff. And all he wanted to major on really was that we should practice in full whites for the Australian series, and it looked so bad with all the train trips and everything. And I said, look, Ted, I was expecting you to give me a right rollicking here about the way we performed. Don't talk to me about tracksuits. We've been wearing tracksuits since 1986. Anyway, we agreed on white tracksuits for the next series anyway. So that was that. But I have fond memories of Ted. He was a bit alternative. He came out with some great lines. He told me, to be a great batsman, you need to bat in a bath. And I said, what do you mean by that, Ted? Bat in a bath? He said, stand in a bath and see how you can move, and you can only move forward and backwards. And he was absolutely right. So he had some great lines, and I certainly looked at his website on occasions. He had some great nuggets of information, and I have nothing but fond memories for him. Like Troutbeck said, John Barclay, I watched him as a kid. He was a brave, a charismatic player, and he's one that inspired you to play the game.
Yeah, I mean, and he was in that generation, wasn't he? I mean, Cowdrey, May, Barrington, Graveney. I mean, there were some pretty flamboyant and decent players around there. I'm just interested why you and John Barclay and Mark sort of latched onto Dexter as your sort of your childhood heroes. What was it about him that stood him apart from those other brilliant batsmen? After all.
Well, I count myself very lucky because I had a lot of exposure to Ted, obviously, when I was captain in England a bit later, a bit earlier to Kenny Barrington, who was, as you know, assistant manager on tours when myself, David Gowrie, and both and Mike Gatt and John Embry were very formative in our test careers. So we were very lucky. But, Ted was a guy that, took the attack to the opposition. He was fearless. He kept his head up high. He challenged the opposition. And he batted in the way that I think you should bat. You should project yourself and have a presence at the crease. And, he was brilliant at that.
Yeah, and I was there in Calcutta when he talked about the alignment of the planets being wrong and so on, and trying to explain that defeat in that first Test match there, when the selection was obviously a bit, unbalanced compared to the two teams, them playing spinners and we had the quick bowlers all playing and so on. And I mean, do you think that was him just taking the flak and taking the pressure off you as captain and the players, and coming out with this business, trying to explain it in a sort of bizarre sort of way what went wrong over those 5 days?
Well, yeah, I mean, Ted was a bit alternative. I mean, you couldn't argue against that. Some of the things he came out with, he called Devon Malcolm Devon, which didn't go down too well, was it? Not knowing the names of the players. I mean, yeah, that tour was horrendous for us because, I'm actually having lunch with John Embry at the moment, so I better not mention it because he always...
Don't mention Navjot Sidhu.
No. He gets stuck into me when we didn't play him or Tufnell in that first Test and played Ian Salisbury, so I don't want to reignite that conversation. Look, Ted had, he had some different ideas, but generally his knowledge on cricket was first class, and he was a leader, and he come out with some alternative things, but it was nothing but pleasure, when I was involved with him, even though years before he said Graham Gooch captain in England was like being hit in the face with a wet fish.
Can I say, Graham, I'm really pleased that you mentioned that, because I was just debating next door whether or not I brought that up.
Not a problem, Jonathan. You've got to be able to take, if you give it out, you've got to be able to take a bit. You should know that.
I do. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was just wondering, therefore, what the meeting was like when he appointed you captain. I mean, did you bring it up?
I don't remember bringing it up, but I think I was the last choice, wasn't I? Because they wanted Gatt, but he was cut aside by Ozzie Wheatley, if I remember rightly.
Yes.
Then David Gowrie went back to David in '89 after I was going to captain in India in '88, and that tour was cancelled because of the South African connections. So I was probably last choice, but I enjoyed my time as captain of England.
Yeah, there was a lot going on when he mentioned those things that actually Ted would have to have coped with as chairman of selectors.
Yeah, it was a merry-go-round, wasn't it? At that stage, in life, we used to chop and change quite a lot, and the continuity probably was not the watchword. It was difficult, but I remember once in India he came out. I can't remember whether it was the Nehru Trophy, or whether it was the tour. I think it was the Nehru Trophy in 1989, and he summoned some of the players up to the top of the Meghdut Hotel in Kanpur. I'm sure you've been there, Jonathan.
Oh, yes.
Lovely spot, not to be recommended in TripAdvisor.
It's still there.
Anyway, it's still there, I'm sure it is. And he lectures us about what food to eat in India, well-cooked food, the curries and all that sort of stuff. And we said, yes, Ted, and we listened. And then, of course, he went down ill for the next week. And I'm not sure whether he had paratyphoid or what, but he was carried out on a stretcher and shipped back home to the UK. So it didn't quite work out that well.
Graham, thanks for joining us, and it's lovely to hear those stories. Enjoy your lunch with John Embry, and as I say, don't mention Navshot Singh Sidhu.
I won't. Keep well. Bye.
And you, Graham. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. There we go. Some lovely stories there. Victor. I think we've got a flavour there of the man, an outstanding, incredibly brilliant cricketer. There's some eccentricity there as well.
At that time, there are so many tales. And I mean, that was a very controversial tour to India, the one you've been talking about, where Graham was captain. He made, as chairman, some odd selections. Remember Richard Blakey went, Dermot Reeve went, no David Gower. That was the big thing. And I always remember this exchange with another old friend of ours who's no longer with us, but it was the announcement of the touring team, and the big news was the fact that Gower was not going. And you remember John Thickness, who was an absolute terrier in the press box for the Evening Standard. And I remember Thickness saying, Ted, could I ask you one question, which is, how is it that you can possibly go to India without with all their spinners, without a test quality left-hander in your squad? And I think Ted smiled because he thought he had a bit of a half volley. I said, I think, John, if you look at the tour party, you'll find that Neil Fairbrother is in the squad. And Ted was feeling quite pleased with himself until Thickness turned around. Ted, I said test quality left-hander. Anyway.
But there was an MCC meeting, wasn't there?
That's right. There was an extraordinary general meeting of the MCC, and I think the establishment won, but there was a vote of no confidence in the selection panel, which was run by the MCC in those days. Yeah. But as I say, it's the Ted. I mean, we've talked about him as a selector, but actually it was Ted the batsman.
Yeah, absolutely. Wish I'd seen him.
And well, I've just got one other recollection, because he came back, as Mark was telling us, and played for Sussex in the John Player League in around about 1970. He just played John Player League games. Yeah. And I remember going along to Taunton at the time where Somerset had just signed Tom Cartwright, who was one of the most accurate seamers from Warwickshire, beautiful bowler. And every week he would play in the John Player League, where you could bowl 8 overs, and he would end up with 1 for 18, 2 for 20, 1 for 15, every week. Rock solid. Until we played Sussex, and I was there watching this as a kid, as a sort of 14-year-old probably. And this week, 8 overs, no maidens, 1 for 77.
Really?
And he bowled, I promise you, Cartwright would have bowled in exactly the same place as he bowled the previous weeks, which was bang on a length, on off stump. But Ted Dexter had just, in the way that we've heard described, just stood tall and hit through the line, back over his head, in a way that no one ever did then. Yeah. But he was just a fantastic striker of the ball. And, of course, I'm surprised Mark didn't mention, but his golfing. Scratch golfer. And, I think at one point, considering whether to go on the professional tour as a golfer. I mean, he played...
he wrote books, novels, there's not many
that's
things.
Right, Test Kill was his novel with an old Observer editor, which was a thriller, whodunit type thing. He did just about everything you could possibly do, with style and elan.
Panache, absolutely. Well, thanks for your memories as well, Victor, and for everyone for contributing to Ted Dexter, who was a pleasure to have met.